Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this Fireside Chat. Speaking today will be Chung-Ching Kwong. She's a Hong Kong digital rights activist and the Hong Kong campaigns coordinator for Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China. We're also joined by Banasaya Siti Jira Watanakul, a Thai pro-democracy activist and a leader for the United Front of Thammasat and Demonstration. I'll be your facilitator today, and my name is Amin Thet. I'm the features editor for Frontier Myanmar, a news magazine focused on current affairs in Myanmar. Something that all three of us have in common, who are on in this fireside chat today, are that we are all working from exile from where we used to be, which were Hong Kong, Thailand, and Myanmar, respectively. This is a rising trend among those of us who are working to keep our societies in East and Southeast Asia more free and more democratic. And not only are we in a precarious situation because we cannot know if our host governments will continue to be able to host us, but we also have to worry about our friends, colleagues, and families who are left behind, in some cases in prison. I personally have 2 family members in prison right now, a colleague who was recently released from prison, and my mother is currently wanted and on the run back in Myanmar. The work we do generally endangers the activists and journalists who are working on this stuff. But to stop the work is also to allow that danger to swallow the rest of our communities unimpeded. So we're here today to discuss digital authoritarianism, which many countries in East and Southeast Asia are trending towards, including the increasing of surveillance, the removal of anonymity online, and the prosecution of online speech and behavior. In Myanmar, where I used to work and sort of the country I still focus on, much of the internet is now inaccessible without VPN. And most of the independent news outlets are outright banned, making much of the journalism that is being done technically a crime, as well as the activism and advocacy for regime change, as well as for new elections and for democracy to be respected. Technically also a crime. And the regime in control of the telecoms community, And the military regime in control of the telecom companies is currently actively using them to surveil the entire country to find dissidents so that they can be imprisoned, which often means that they're also being tortured, and to try and stop the resistance movement against them. So for our 2 speakers today, I would like to start off by asking, what are some laws existing or proposed related to digital authoritarianism that you are most worried about right now? Or alternatively, what do you think is the biggest challenge moving forwards in regards to these issues in the context in which you work? And I think I will ask Panasaya to answer that first.
Okay, thank you for the question, and I can speak in Thai, right? And you will be translated. ในของไทยอะค่ะมันมีพรบทั้งตอนนี้มันมีทั้งพรบฉุกเฉินพรบคอมพิวเตอร์เนี่ยมีมาตั้งแต่ปี2017 ก็คือพ.ศ. 2560นะคะที่หลังจากคณะรัฐประหารเข้ามายึดอำนาจพอหลังจากนั้นเนี่ยพอมันมีพรบตัวนี้ขึ้นมาเนี่ยไม่ว่านักกิจกรรมหรือว่าประชาชนทั่วไปเนี่ยจะโพสต์ข้อความหรือว่าแม้กระทั่งแชร์ข่าว BBC ก็สามารถที่จะโดนข้อหานี้และเมื่อโดนพรบคอมเนี่ยมันก็อาจนำไปสู่ข้อหาอื่นๆได้อีกค่ะเช่นข้อหามาตรา116ยุยงปลุกปั่นหรือว่ามาตรา112เลมาเจเต้นะคะซึ่งตรงนี้เนี่ยมันถูกใช้มาตั้งแต่มันเกิดขึ้นแล้วค่ะหลายคนก็โดนซึ่งคนที่เคยโดนหนักที่สุดเนี่ยน่าจะเป็นนักกิจกรรมที่ชื่อไผ่ดาวดินที่โดนข้อหาพรบคอมเนี่ยและก็112ต้องอยู่ในคุกถึง2 ปีกว่าจะได้ออกมาและปัจจุบันนี้ก็ยังคงใช้กฎหมายตัวนี้อยู่ค่ะซึ่งมันทำให้คนเนี่ยพูดลำบากหมายถึงแสดงออกลำบากมากแสดงออกทางการเมืองหรือว่าแสดงออกในเรื่องต่างๆการแสดงความคิดเห็นเนี่ยคนต้องระวังมากขึ้นเพราะว่าเราไม่อาจดูได้เลยว่าจะมีใครที่จะมาแจ้งข้อหา เหล่านี้กับเราไหมหรือว่าเราจะเป็นเป้าหมายต่อไปของมันหรือเปล่า
Thank you so much. I think that's definitely something, a trend we see in Myanmar as well, where we don't have a lèse majestés law, but very common legal codes that get used against activists especially are sedition as well as incitement. And I think it's really interesting to note how often these sorts of things are tied to allegedly undermining the security of the country. As opposed to kind of what they're really about, which is insulting people in power or people in power feeling like they're insulted. Chang Cheng, can I ask you the same question?
Yes, of course. In Hong Kong, it's quite crazy, like in my opinion. Never expected to see that kind of thing in Hong Kong. Basically, we have a law called the National Security Law in Hong Kong right now that's being imposed since 2020. It basically criminalizes all sorts of dissents and political activities that are not like suitable in Beijing's eyes. Basically, if you are a local protesters, you're basically terrorists. If you're encouraging people to go to protest, you fall into the same category. And if you, like me, are talking to like international organizations, foreign governments, then you're colluding with foreign forces. And it also has an implication on the online world. Imagine you actually don't know where the red line is when you're using social media or retweeting something that's related to, for example, calling for sanctions against Chinese officials online. That may be counted as like infringing the national security law. At the same time, this law actually provides the government with immense power. And they can use this power against online service providers, platforms, and internet service providers. For example, they can request websites being removed from the internet in Hong Kong. And a few websites like NGOs in the UK called Hong Kong Watch is being removed from the Hong Kong internet by like DNS tampering. So if you don't have a VPN in Hong Kong, you basically have no access to those information. And internet service providers are obliged to carry out this decision or else they risk criminal liability. And also they risk, if they're not complying, they're going to be their like servers or whatever they use to host the contents will be removed by the government so that they can do it themselves. So it basically puts everybody in a very difficult situation. So as ordinary users, you start to second guess whether or not something is okay to be said. And as service providers, you kind of face, you either cease operating in Hong Kong or you comply with national security law, which goes against the value, like for example, freedom of speech, freedom of expression that they want to uphold. So everybody is being put in this very difficult situation. And another thing is we have something like a sedition law too, like as Thailand and Myanmar does. And the scope, we see the application of that scope, it's widening from criticizing the government, which is clearly in their eyes sedition, to commenting on government's COVID policy. People have been arrested for commenting COVID policies online, saying that we're not going to use the Corona app because it has security concerns, privacy concerns. They got arrested and they get charged with sedition. Like there are a lot of like these kind of different cases that are ongoing. So we kind of see more and more laws being used, and it's not only like this very obviously politically driven laws. There are like, for example, the government is proposing copyright amendment in Hong Kong again, which actually hinder free speech online because they don't provide enough exemption for many common expression when it comes to politics, like memes, derivative works, user-generated content. They don't cover them well enough. So that you kind of like, oh, I'm not sure if it's going to be a copyright infringement, so maybe I should stop doing it. And all of these laws all serve a common purpose, which is using fear to kind of lure you into self-censorship, because the risk of speaking up is too high. And most people will have that mindset of better be safe than sorry. So to kind of like create a chilling, like it actually creates a chilling effect in the society, and then people stop speaking about different things.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think the self-censorship angle is something that's quite important because it's not just, as you were saying, the legal repression, right? It's creating a situation in which the people essentially internalize these repressive governments' logics about what is and isn't acceptable political speech or just any speech at all. So that brings me to my next question, actually. which is related to self-censorship, especially because of the kind of harassment that people tend to face, both legal as well as social. I think we've all seen kind of these armies of bots and trolls online that will go after activists and dissidents and journalists. Do you ever find yourself self-censoring and trying to mitigate harm, whether that is in terms of the exact wording you might use, whether or not you talk about a specific topic at all, or like in terms of your timing, how are you kind of navigating the situation? And let's start with you, Changche.
Okay, I think I unmuted myself, yes. I'd say I do practice self-censorship. Like I'm currently living abroad in exile in Germany. And I do engage in self-censorship still. Like there are things I know I shouldn't talk about because it will put colleagues and friends that are still in Hong Kong in danger. Like I will not disclose any details of them, even unless they give me like explicit consent, like you can talk about it to international media and so on. And when I was back in Hong Kong, I do observe that I am practicing self-censorship in real life and in online spaces, because at the time I was helping a candidate in Hong Kong to run her election. And we would sit down and said, okay, this wording on the pamphlet might be problematic in terms of the national security law. Is there something we can change? How do we change it? How do we circumvent the red line? And that is basically the complete opposite of what I just talked about, which is we shouldn't engage in self-censorship because it's how everybody stops talking about certain things, because fear is contagious in that case. And I think right now I still do too. I know that there are certain things that should not be said, or else, as I said, I'll drive people into trouble. And at the same time, I know there are certain ideas that we're not supposed to discuss. Like, for example, any discussion, whether or not I support it or not, about separatism in the international world, like if Uyghurs or Tibetans should have a say on, or should have self-determination, should Hong Kongers have self-determination? These things we kind of refrain from talking about it publicly online as well, but it's not related to only to China oppression, but it's also related to how you want to be perceived in terms of the international movement in general, because a lot of politicians and governments are very afraid of touching on these topics because of Beijing reaction. And so we kind of have to navigate all of those norms and all those settings at the same time. So we do engage a lot in self-censorship, being inside or outside of Hong Kong.
It sounds extremely familiar, but can I get Vanessa to add your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think three of us have familiar experience of that. In Thailand, our Thailand activist is we try to push our bar of the freedom of speech in Thailand, because one of the demand of our protest is about the reforming the monarchy, which is the very risky thing to do in Thailand. Maybe you can get killed or something, but you don't know. So when we try to push that, we try so hard, and actually it's success for like the cultural movement. But after that, after we get the put to jail or arrested by the police and several times, then we later that we try to self-censor again. We try to like don't talk about the thing like too straight. Like we have to like use the symbol or use the meme or the sarcastic thing to say about that, instead to go straight and say it, because like we think that we don't want any of us to put to jail again, because it's waste of time in the jail, and you can do anything for the movement. And also the relationship with the family is very important for me. Like I I was put to jail like 3 times in the past 2 years, and it become like a very big problem in our family because like the youngest the youngest daughter is going to jail, and what the others do for her. And for right now, I think everyone in my family is over the stress and depressed, but we try to get back together and recovering everyone. But also this is like, it's obvious that the government and who that have the power, like the king of the Thailand, try to do with that they try to like, don't you, if you don't say anything, I don't do anything to you, but if you say so, I will put you to jail or do anything worse. And it's just like that. Today now, okay, we have more like a higher bar of freedom of speech in Thailand, and we have some people who still maintaining that bar, but now the older activists that fight before have to like the lower our bar to keep ourselves outside, not in the jail.
Yeah, that actually brings me to my next question, which is a little bit about how do you navigate the work that you do, especially when you know it can endanger not just yourself, but your family and the people you associate with as well. I'm in a, I suppose you call it lucky position in that the family members who are currently either imprisoned or on the run from the regime, it's through their own activism. So it wasn't because I was out there being very rebellious. But the rest of my family didn't necessarily sign up for this. And I'm sure your different family members have different understandings about what you do and how they feel about it. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that as well. And can we start with you, Panusaku? So yeah, sorry, Panusaku.
It's okay. I can. This time I will say in Thai. So sorry. คือตอนคือมันอยู่ที่การพูดคุยในครอบครัวเลยเราคิดว่า คือบ้านครอบครัวเราเนี่ยก็ไม่ได้แบบว่า เราไม่ได้ห้ามปรามกันนะคือเราเป็นห่วงกันแต่ว่าสุดท้ายแล้วเนี่ยไม่ว่ามันจะผ่านอะไรมาโอเค2 ปีที่ผ่านมามันผ่านอะไรมาบ้างขึ้นศาลกี่ครั้งเข้าคุกไปกี่ครั้งหรือว่าเจอคดีมากี่คดีอะค่ะมันก็ไม่ได้มีการเซ็นเซอร์เกิดขึ้นในครอบครัวแต่ทางไปต่อของเราเนี่ยคือโอเคอย่างน้อยเนี่ยเราอยู่ข้างนอกให้ได้นานที่สุดอันนี้คือสิ่งที่พวกเราคิดนะตอนนี้ค่ะในนักกิจกรรมไทยคิดกันตอนนี้คืออยู่ข้างนอกให้นานที่สุดและใช้เวลาที่มีเนี่ยคิดในการวางยุทธศาสตร์ที่เข้มแข็งขึ้นคือตอนนี้ในไทยเนี่ยต้องยอมรับว่าองค์กรจัดตั้งของเราเนี่ยไม่ได้เข้มแข็งเลยและมันก็เป็นสิ่งที่ผู้มีอำนาจในประเทศไทยเนี่ยพยายามมาตั้งแต่สมัยเกือบ100 ปีที่แล้วในการพยายามไม่ให้มีการรวมกลุ่มกันเกิดขึ้นในประเทศไทยเพื่อป้องกันการเราคิดเองนะเราคิดว่ามันเพื่อป้องกันการล้มล้างการปกครองในประเทศนี้ซึ่งก็ดูเหมือนจะความคิดคนก็ดูเหมือนจะหลีดไปสู่การสิ่งนั้นมากขึ้นเรื่อยๆหมายถึงแบบไม่ใช่แค่การปฏิรูปสถาบันต่างๆแต่อาจจะเป็นมากกว่าปฏิรูปไปแล้วนะตอนนี้แต่ว่าอย่างไรก็ตามไม่ว่าคนจะคิดยังไงในอนาคตนะคะแต่ว่าณตอนนี้เราคิดแค่ว่ายุทธศาสตร์เนี่ยทำยังไงให้องค์กรจัดตั้งเราเข้มแข็งขึ้นถึงจะอยู่ใต้สถานการณ์ที่ไม่เอื้ออำนวยอะไรเลย
Right. And what about you, Chongqing? Do you want to add anything to that?
I'd say it's quite tricky for me personally too. Like I still have friends and loved ones who are inside of Hong Kong, and the way to protect them is basically not tell them anything, because it's the easiest way to help them circumvent the risk. Like if they get asked, do you know what Chongqing Huang is up to? They can honestly say, I really don't know, and then they don't have to pretend that they don't know. But it's really, really sad to know that the things that you do actually put people at risk. In my case, like media has done interviews with me after I've been like quite active in terms of international advocacy. And it became proof in court that they're committing sedition. And those people actually know in real life and we're friends, or some colleagues sharing the work that I do, and they're like, again, on court documents saying that this is your proof of violating the national security law. And even though you reasonably knows it's not your fault, it's actually not you, it's the oppressor's fault, but you still kind of struggle with the fact that you seem to be putting other people at risk. And it's a very difficult topic to talk to people as well, because you know your friends are going to be like, don't be silly, it's not your fault. But you kind of struggle with the guilt on a daily basis whenever you heard about these things. And I genuinely don't have a solution or navigate, like how do I navigate with these things? I'm just like, okay, I'm gonna live with it and see what I can do in the future. But at this moment, I'm still kind of struggling with all of the impact that my work has on other people.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely quite difficult. And I think especially when we all had to essentially upend our lives and move to other places, it can be especially isolating to know that not only are we in completely new spaces, we can't talk about some of the things we're doing with the people closest to us. I wanted to pivot just a little bit and maybe bring a little bit of optimism back into the discussion. But I think something that I think about a lot is the fact that a lot of these regimes, these sort of want to be dictators, are, even if they're not directly communicating with each other, they're definitely watching each other and learning from each other in terms of how they can repress the countries that they have control over. So I was wondering if, from your perspective, what are some things that the kind of the movements between our countries, of our countries, are doing well, and whether you think we are learning from each other as well, and what advice you would give for other countries, for activists and others in countries who look at a situation in Hong Kong or Myanmar or Thailand, and they can take away and to make sure that their countries don't follow down this path. Do you want to start, Chongqing?
Yeah, of course. My advice, it feels quite patronizing to say advice in a way. I'm in a position to advise you because we're all in very different situations. But my like really heartfelt things that came on a few levels. The first level is personal level. As an activist, as a human rights defender, as a participant of any kind of social movement, you really, really have to take care of yourself physically and mentally. That's your body, and your mental health is your asset to actually do things. So you really have to take a break and avoid burnout in all situations. You have to make yourself a priority in some cases. I know it's very difficult. Like everyone struggles with it. Every activist I know struggle with it, all from all walks of different activism. And at the same time, I think we always have to, on an organization level, we always have to stay in touch with other movements and other things, because more than often we have common grounds. We're all fighting for, to be honest, the same thing, which is for a better world that we can all live in together happily and have like great lives and so on. And there are always lessons to learn from. I'm not saying we're directly comparable, but looking at what happened in Hong Kong and Thailand, there are so many parallels that we are learning from each other and trying to develop things and strategies that actually are developed by one another, and then we kind of evolve together. And I think this kind of support and this kind of organizational cooperation is like very important. And finally, I think we should all learn to push our governments to do better for one another. It's not just Hong Kong, or it's not just Thailand or Myanmar, because the oppressors, they all have like common interests, and so do we as activists. So there is always ways that we can work together to fight for policy changes, for different kind of like for example, an intervention sanctions regime, we all benefit from it because Thailand oppressors deserve to be sanctioned, Myanmar oppressors deserve to be sanctioned, and China's too. And so we can all work together on these levels so that we can facilitate like better changes in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think something that was quite inspiring this last couple of years has been the expansion of the Milk Tea Alliance, especially. I think every time, you know, people add like a new cup of milk tea, it's really exciting to see. I mean, it's really tragic because obviously it speaks to how common these repressions are. But I think it's also great to see that people are starting to understand that, you know, all of our struggles are interconnected and that we have more in common than we have differences. Yeah, Vanessa, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think it's like what you said. Even we didn't contact that much, but also we follow the movement in other countries from like time to time and adopt something into our own, like how like Hong Kong demonstration, like leaderless and do flash mobbing using communication technology, and we adopt that to do in Thailand too, and also in Myanmar, like how to protect self with a thing that you can find in your like your area. Is I think that is amazing, and yeah, we also adopt that to do in the in Thailand demonstration too. And I don't know what I should say more because like what you also say, but I actually I want to know like I want to learn like how the activists in different countries like establish and run their own organization, like how to make it very strong and can put the people together. Like I think in Thailand we like struggle with this thing right now, and yeah, we want to learn from it.
I think that's a really good question. I think oftentimes, even when people are fighting this great injustice, you know, people's personal egos can come and stand in the way. There's trust issues, I think in part facilitated by these regimes, right, who try to undermine collaboration between groups because they understand how powerful that is. And then there's also just the stress, and that can kind of make anyone make poor choices. So I think we have just a minute left before we open it up to audience questions. I think because we have such a short amount of time, just in like a couple words or just a sentence, can you tell us why do you keep fighting despite everything? And whoever wants to go first, maybe Panacea?
Oh, okay. I think it's simple. Like we don't finish our job yet. That's why we will keep going on till we reach our goal. That's it. I just want to see democracy in Thailand. I just want to see we have a freedom, like really literally freedom, like freedom of speech, freedom of anything, freedom of our own identity, everything. Like really, since I born, I never see that thing in Thailand before. But right now we have a walk, and we have a like go near that goal like a little by a little, but yeah, it can be like for 10 years or maybe for 15 years or 116 until we reach our goal. But I don't think I will not continue this pathway until I will like accomplish my my own job.
Changqing, just very quickly.
Oh, it's getting very emotional here. And for me, I'd say it's quite simple. It's not because I'm optimistic. In general, like any reasonable person won't be like that optimistic when it comes to situation in Hong Kong. But is that I simply believe what we're doing is right. We are fighting for things that we should have: democracy, freedoms, universal human rights, and all those things. And that's the right thing to do. And it doesn't matter what it costs us. We have to do it. As she said, we haven't finished jobs here. And I don't want the next generation or the kids now in Hong Kong have to go through the same thing. I basically want them to have a life full of bubble tea and milk tea, and they can like just live with that. It's good. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's quite inspiring. So we have some audience questions. I think I will ask two of them together since they're about similar topics. And you can answer either one or both. The first question is there an international market for technologies that enable digital authoritarianism, and who is exporting that technology? And then the second one is, what would you like technology companies, especially internet companies, to do to resist digital authoritarianism, especially given the legal environments that they are operating in?
Maybe I can go first on this one. I think one of the biggest exports when it comes to surveillance technology, it's the Western world, the free world that we're living, like we look up to be honest. For example, in Xinjiang, we all know that there's like heavy surveillance, and European companies like Siemens, Telefonica, they helped build that system, and that system kind of reinforced and built the capacity for Beijing's power to conduct surveillance. And then they sell this kind of systems and techniques to other authoritarian states, and then they kind of export it. So it's not only Beijing's fault. We also should ask, why are European companies, why are US companies fueling this kind of crackdown indirectly? Why are they doing this? Of course, for benefit, for money. But as countries, are we really accepting that? As citizens, are we really okay with this kind of thing? So pressing our governments to actually stop the entities on our land, on our soil, like doing that. Are we going to stop them? I think this is one of the questions. And there is clearly a market and high demand of surveillance technology. And a lot of the developers actually have the power to decide where does it go. And we should act and put law and regulations in place so that it will not be happening to other places too.
Do you want to add to that, Anastasia?
Yeah, like in ในประเทศไทยเนี่ยเราคิดว่ามันเป็นไปเรื่องนี้มันดูยากมากสำหรับเขาเพราะว่าทุกอย่างเนี่ยมันถูกผูกขาดด้วยนายทุนไปหมดเลยหมายถึงแบบนายทุนในประเทศไทยเนี่ยมันคือมันคลองไว้เยอะแล้วคือที่ผ่านมาเนี่ยอย่างไทยแอคทิวิสต์เนี่ยก็โอเคเคยโดนเจาะจากเพกาซัสและการที่จะเจาะเข้าเพกาซัสได้เนี่ยเจาะเข้าโทรศัพท์เราได้เนี่ยมันก็ต้องอาศัยความร่วมมือจากเครือข่ายมือถือซึ่งทุกเครือข่ายมือถือในไทยก็คือให้ความร่วมมือแทบจะทั้งหมดเพราะงั้นเนี่ยหลายๆอย่างเนี่ยเราไม่สามารถคอนโทรลสิ่งนี้ได้เลยถ้าเราไม่สามารถแบบทลายภูมิผูกขาดที่มีอยู่ในประเทศได้
Yeah, I mean, I think this is definitely an issue in Myanmar as well. We definitely do see Chinese state-controlled companies that come in and help, and who helped the previous civilian government set up the surveillance systems. But we also saw the purchasing of surveillance technology from various companies, especially in Europe. And yeah, I think there is this really big issue that people don't look at that is not just about the money, but it's also this question of Western countries especially wanting to help development without really questioning who is in control of that and what happens if and when these authoritarian leaders decide they want to become even more authoritarian. So we have another question. which is what can we do to help build transnational solidarity to resist digital repression? And what are some suggestions that you might have of how we can work together, or some examples that you've seen of people working together? And do you want to go first this time, Anastasia?
เราคิดว่าสิ่งที่จะช่วยได้เนี่ยคืออย่างน้อยที่สุดเนี่ยคือช่องทางในการเชื่อมประสานของแต่ละคนแบบแต่ละกลุ่มองค์กรในแต่ละประเทศเนี่ยค่ะเพราะว่าอย่างของไทยเนี่ยที่เราเคยมีประสบการณ์มาเราไม่ค่อยได้ติดต่อสื่อสารกับนักกิจกรรมที่อยู่ต่างประเทศเท่าไหร่เพราะเราไม่รู้จะติดต่อยังไงแล้วเราก็ไม่ได้มีช่องทางนะคะมันจะมีแค่บางคนแอคทิวิสต์บางคนเท่านั้นที่โอเครู้จักกับคนที่อยู่ต่างประเทศบ้างแต่เป็นส่วนน้อยมากๆเราคิดว่าทางที่จะช่วยได้เนี่ยคือการสร้างช่องทางในการติดต่อสื่อสารกันนะคะสร้างช่องทางในการพบปะพูดคุยสร้างพื้นที่เราคิดว่าแค่เพียงสร้างพื้นที่ก่อนเนี่ยมันก็น่าจะเพียงพอต่อการต่อยอดการทำงานบางอย่างในอนาคตถ้าเราแบบคุยกันแล้วเรารู้สึกว่าเรามีทางที่จะไปต่อด้วยกันได้และเราสามารถร่วมมือกันได้ค่ะมันก็เป็นความคาดหวังแล้วก็เป็นเราคิดว่าเราก็คาดหวังให้มีสิ่งนี้เกิดขึ้นเหมือนกันเราก็พร้อมที่จะทำงานด้วย
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really important. Although I do think there's also this danger, right, of when you don't necessarily understand or you're not immersed in the context of these other countries and struggles, you know, like, how do you know you're not accidentally collaborating with the oppressors who are kind of pretending, or these groups are a bit more suspect, you know? So I think events like these are always really great. And they're especially great when they're in person, but this is still really good in terms of allowing people to learn about, you know, activists and organizations that we didn't know existed before, and start to make those contacts and start to build those networks. So Chung Cheng, would you like to answer the question as well?
Yes, sure. I'd say one way to build solidarity against digital repression is for us to all step up our digital security game. Are we using end-to-end encryption when we communicate? Are you putting people around you at risk? Because you may not be an activist yourself, but you might have a friend that is active in politics or care a lot about those things. And then if you are not careful enough, you might be exposing that person at risk too. And if we all step up our game, like as citizens, no matter where you are, we are actually increasing the cost of the governments, authoritarian regimes to try to crack down on us. And that's very important. And when it comes to digital security, we need a lot of resources. Are we in contact with each other? So we should like stick together and talk to each other, as she has said, like it's very important. We should be able to share these kind of resources because there's so much available resources out there, and we can help each other to adjust it to our context, because digital security and all of those things are not a one-size-fits-all solution. And through that like process of engaging with each other, solidarity will be naturally built because we share the same cause and we share the same skill set and we're sharing our experience, even though it cannot be directly compared. And so we kind of build solidarity naturally in an organic way. Like you cannot force solidarity. It has to be organically developing. Like the ties between the Milk Tea Alliance is an organic project coming out from one common thread, which is like China's oppression to India, to Thailand on different levels. And so we kind of come together and became this really interesting gang that we have. And it originally originated from a Nintendo game. Like the whole prototype of Milk Tea Alliance is there because of that. Really, I can't remember the name of the game, but because of an online game that we all play together. And so that's kind of become a very interesting thing to see that we can all stand in solidarity together in such an organic way.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I think those are all of our questions for today. I just wanted to wrap up the session by giving out some closing thoughts, summarizing what was discussed today. So I think some things that came out of this discussion were some common threads between all three contexts, which is that, I can't read my own writing. That, you know, I think everyone here is quite concerned about what the sort of danger that their work produces, not just for themselves, but for their family. That criticism of oppression and injustice is often taken by these authoritarian regimes as sedition, as a threat to national security, or even terrorism. I think some really important and interesting advice that the panelists had to give are, first and foremost, that you need to prioritize yourself. I think as activists, it's quite easy to think of the work you're doing as a sacrifice, and to keep sacrificing and keep working because, you know, the fight isn't won and the injustice seems so vast compared to yourself. But, you know, going to jail is for many of us, is a waste of our time, the waste of the contributions that we could be making if we were otherwise not in jail. And we also need to protect our mental health in order that we can continue to do this work in the long term, especially if this is not a fight that's going to be won in either a short amount of time or even necessarily in our lifetimes. Another piece of big advice that came out of this discussion was that we need to be paying attention to and learning from other movements. You know, the oppressors have common interests, as Changqing was saying, but so do we, right? And so if they can learn from each other, so can we. And the people, the power of the people is always going to be so much stronger as long as we can get to a place where we are united, working together. I think another good point that was brought up also was about digital security and increasing the cost for these authoritarian regimes and their slow worker bees when it comes to trying to either take apart our movements or try to stop these movements. I want to bring up a tactic that was actually used in Myanmar, which the Myanmar government is very archaic in the way it functions. And one thing that people did at the beginning to just waste their time was they programmed bots to just fax government offices random things. And it just wasted a bunch of their money and like stopped their ability to communicate. And I think the sort of like creativity is also something that is a really huge strong point of our movements because, you know, we are disproportionately young, we are disproportionately tech savvy, and even with all this technology, all this money that these regimes have, right? Like the three of us, I'm sure, have very little money combined together, and yet we and our groups are able to remain relatively free and relatively able to continue to do our work. And then I guess I just want to end on a couple notes that I found really inspiring about what our two speakers here said, which is that they are continuing to keep fighting because the job isn't done. And I think, you know, it can be really easy to get very disillusioned and to feel like you've done enough or you've personally put in so much. And there are people in your country who, you know, are relatively happy with the status quo. I think it's really helpful to keep in mind the idea that Panacea was saying about how until the job is done, until we've won, this movement will keep going with or without us, and I would rather continue to stay fighting in it. And I think what Changqing was saying about how what we're fighting for is what is right is also really important to remember, because it is very draining on our mental health. You do hear people accusing you of all sorts of things, right? Of like, you know, being like a collaborator with the West, or, you know, often said in much more sexist and violent terms. And it can sometimes make you question yourself in your darkest moments. But at the end of the day, what we're fighting for is right, and the job isn't done. And so we will all keep fighting. And I hope everyone who is joining us today will continue to join us in that fight.